Hello and welcome to the final class of our third week in the UX UI Bootcamp. This one is going to be themed around communication in UX and what that means. So let's take a look briefly at what we did thus far. So last week we started thinking about personas in the proto-persona format, assumptions and generalizations based on small findings. Then we learned how to look deeper by practicing some user interviews with one another. And then we built on our empathy skills and our own personal confidence as UX researchers by going out and actually doing the interviews. We deepened our observational skills by using the note-taking method AEIOU while doing an ethnography. And we began to understand business needs with the competitive analysis. The beginning of this week, we deepened our understanding of competitive market through further competitive analysis. We learned how to make sense of research data using affinity diagrams, and we brought those combined findings together into an empathy map for our user, which we then use to define our user's problem or challenge currently. So we're well on our way to a solid first project. And so in today's class, we're going to build off what we've already done by creating very clear user personas, really well-informed ones using our research data. So we're going to take all of our knowledge and bits and pieces of info that we've got about users that we've worked on so far, and we're going to pull insights out of that. And those are going to help our design ideas be informed and be moving in the right direction. So solving the right problem is the goal there. And we're going to also work on something that's very much ignored, I think, a lot of times, but I think is important. We're going to learn how to effectively communicate the research data that we get to other people, various different working styles or roles within your company. We're going to practice that. And then we're going to pull all of this stuff together into a design brief. So that's important. So we're going to build on our persona for the travel app project. Just like empathy maps, personas are going to let you get to know the user. It doesn't create the knowledge, it's a representation of the knowledge you've gained in a very organized format. So really it's more of a deliverable than anything. So remember we went over this whole persona. We're going to do a couple things to ensure that there's a really great lump of data in this persona. So some of the tips are going to be, we're going to let the empathy map and the proto-persona be our guide to creating this persona, along with the other data that we have. We're going to be referring back to notes from user interviews, observations, things in the affinity diagram that popped up for multiple users. We're going to really bring the user to life here, okay? We're going to remember to include personal info as it relates to the product wherever possible. And just remember that the persona is a representation of all of your users, not just one of them. So you want to kind of find the overlaps in between each user, because we kind of did a small number at this point. So things that we're going to want to remember to include are a picture of a real human, a quote that represents their personality in relation to the product, basic demographics, device usage, personality traits, interests, again, somewhat related to the product, or interests that would somehow affect their use of the product, or drive it, or whatever. Things, how they engage with things that interest them, goals they have, and challenges they have in relation to their goals or in relation to use of the current product that they're into, whichever. So here's your activity slide. We're going to go ahead and take about 5 minutes to write down a few paragraphs that describe our user, just like in sort of a loose, like rough draft kind of storytelling way. And I can leave up this slide, or I can leave up the slide before it, whichever you prefer. Side note, were this a real class, I would give them the 5 minutes to come up with their stuff, and the next move would be asking someone to share. I think it's important for my students to share stuff in class, verbally, up in front of the class, because it is nerve-wracking for a lot of people, and I want them to get used to that in an environment where they're allowed to make mistakes and feel uncomfortable without being chastised or losing a job over it. And this is where I would pick back up So in developing user insights, the user insights are first and foremost, let me just say, they're the leaps that we take and the assumptions that we make that are not based on nothing. They're not based on our personal experience either. They're based on what we know and what that logically might mean, given all the context and everything. So jobs, be insightful. A lot of times people don't know what they want till you show them what they want or what's available to them. Okay? This goes back to recognition over recall, but it's a much deeper way of utilizing that theory. Insight would be the ability to understand a person's situation clearly and the understanding about or of the truth of a situation. So this is not something that we take lightly. It's something that we have basis for thinking or coming up with. So let's say, for example, with the problem statement, we reference the challenges users face clearly, and we're reframing the challenges that users are facing clearly and concisely. So, for example, our user is trying to find somewhere to stay while on vacation, but would also love to have access to amenities available while at home, like, say, a kitchen. An insight will go further. So let's say that's the problem statement, right? An insight's going to go further into what the user's goal is, but also like why and where opportunities might be afforded to us. So we're not assuming that much about the user. We're assuming what might work for the user. Do you understand? For instance, an insight might be, you might want to share a relevant observation from research, something along the lines of 8 out of 10 users were surveyed were unhappy with the restaurant options they found near their hotels. During the interviews, we heard them mention a preference for staying with with family if possible, because there's a kitchen and there's other amenities and a fridge, and you can just behave more naturally, like as if you were at home, even though you're traveling. So because we heard this pop up a lot in our interviews, we could then move forward to explain the conclusion that I've come to based on the insight. So users might have a more pleasant experience while traveling if they could manage to feel at home anywhere. It's still just a theory. We would have to run through and test this, but it's a pretty sound theory based on what we know and what we've heard from users. We're still not assuming anything about the user, their needs, their goals. We're just being creatively forward motioned with our thoughts in terms of how to solve that problem for them. We're not even saying that we know the perfect way. We're just hypothesizing. So now the concept is where you're going to articulate your design concept by revealing the actual idea in a few sentences. So here's where we would say something like, we could find a way to connect people who travel with locals who are willing to rent out their apartment or home for a little while. That way, while traveling, people can feel at home anywhere. Even if it's not their own home, it's a home. That would also kill off the whole I hate restaurants thing and potentially be a solution for the problem. So now we're going to talk about execution, because we're going to want to know what it's going to take for us to make this happen. So we could communicate things like, we might use a format for finding homes to rent that is similar to how users might book a flight or a hotel, because that's something they already know how to do. And host homes can mean anything: the whole home, the camper, the RV, the treehouse, whatever. Obviously, we're using Airbnb as an example here. And then we're going to talk about why this would be a good thing. So we're going to reveal why this is a benefit. We think that this might be the next new thing in travel and hospitality, because we want to inspire people to travel, and we want individuals to be able to earn money while opening their homes to others. So it's beneficial on two sides, the host and the traveler. Now, the goal of writing key insights is to share pieces of data that helped you form an opinion about the situation, not about the people, about the situation, the challenge, and how that might be solved. We need to remember that just like personas, insights are specific, not general, measurable, action-oriented, relevant, and time-bound. So we've got a timeline here, because everyone involved needs to know what's expected and when it should be delivered. Remember that insights are based on interview data, observations, competitive analysis, stakeholder interviews, any research you've done, all of it. And if you need to pull in more because you feel like some areas are lacking, then stop and go back and do more research. So now we're going to go ahead and do an activity where we write our insights, and I feel like this slide is much more important for you to look at while you're working on it. So what we're going to do is there are a few key areas. There's 5. So the insight, we want to share the most relevant observation for research. We might say something along the lines of, during blank type of research, we discovered that blank, and this would be the most prevalent finding amongst users. Then we're going to go to the therefore. So therefore, we believe that thing that you believe based on research, and that we might be able to help if we can. And then you put your umbrella, like, broad idea, right? Then you get really into the depth with the concept, and you might say that's sort of like, we might be able to do this by, and that's where you detail it. And then you get into the benefit. Doing this will allow the product to, and then talk about how the solution would have an overall effect on not just the main user, but anybody else, or the environment, or whatever else it would affect. If there are significant drawbacks, you may mention that in a postscript. And the way we would title that is potential risks. But I'd rather you focus more on the creativity side of this right now, and we'll talk more about the disaster prep later. Go ahead and get started. Please note, this is now where I would give my students about 20 minutes to write these statements, monitoring the class and walking around to make sure that everyone was on track and helping whoever needed help. Some classes take longer than 20 minutes to get their insights together. Some take drastically less. And then generally I would have them pair up and swap their insight statements and review each other's work, and take notes on what the commentary was, and then again and again and again for a bit, and then we would generally